Hello viewers and welcome to the latest episode of The Huddle. Tim Poole here, editor of Gambling Insider, and I'm with Tim Miller, Executive Director of the Gambling Commission. Tim, welcome back.
Really good to be here.
Yeah, great to speak to you. Obviously, we did one of these a few months ago. No doubt a lot has happened since then in gaming regulation. I wanted to ask my first question, is it fair to say the Commission over the last maybe few months, couple of years, is becoming a lot more open to dialogue with the industry and to people like myself, because obviously yourself and Andrew Rhodes it seems like you're doing a lot more speaking and engaging in dialogue a little bit more than perhaps in previous years.
Yeah, I mean, certainly I think we're engaging a lot with lots of different stakeholders, and I suppose in large part the white paper is a key driver of that. You know, there's so many issues in there, so many things we're consulting on, that we want to be out there talking to people, getting their views, getting their inputs. And I have to say, it's actually been a really positive experience. Andrew Rhodes and I, for example, have kind of regular roundtables with some of the chief execs from the top companies, talking about the white paper, you know, seeking views, giving them updates. And that's been really, really positive, really well received. So, yeah, you know, hopefully people like you and the industry are seeing that we're actually out there listening, speaking to people.
Yeah, no, it's great to hear, and I think every sector of the industry and every jurisdiction wants more, well, not more, but an open dialogue with the regulator. We certainly hear that in countries like maybe Sweden or Netherlands, where that's improved, I think, over the years recently too. As I say, we spoke a few months ago, and a lot has happened since then. In terms of latest developments and maybe things to come, can you give me a couple of updates? First, on the gambling survey of Great Britain.
Yeah, so, you know, this has been quite a long-running piece of work. So we kicked it off probably getting on for about 3 years ago. And what we were seeking to do with that was to really make sure that we've got the most comprehensive, kind of accurate and robust data that we can, particularly around kind of participation in gambling, around prevalence of problem gambling and gambling harms. So we've taken a really kind of deliberative approach. It's taken 3 years because we've been really focused on getting this right. Over the coming months, you'll see more and more information come out about this. We've, to ensure that it's really robust, we've commissioned independent external reviews. That will be made available fairly shortly, done by Professor Patrick Sturgis from the London School of Economics. And hopefully that will give people reassurance that actually we've done a really good job on this. We've been really focused on the kind of the accuracy of the data. Obviously, because it's going to be a different methodology, you won't be able to compare those numbers to what came before. And we'll be really clear when we publish this to say to people, journalists, campaigners and others, that the data's got to be used in the right way, that you can't assume that if we have a different rate of problem gambling that means that it's gone up or gone down. It's a different methodology. But I think the key thing is that it will give us much more up-to-date information. At times, the health survey could be a period of months or sometimes years between when the data was collected and when we had the results. This will be coming through on a quarterly basis to us, so it'll be much more up-to-date. And we'll be speaking, when it's fully operational, to about 20,000 consumers a year, which means it will be the biggest survey of its type anywhere in the world.
Well, yeah, certainly progress there. In terms of latest developments, that's kind of the UK market, which of course there's plenty going on in the UK market, but you guys are involved in something in the US as well?
Yeah, that's right. So I think over the last year there's been huge step forwards in collaboration between regulators on both sides of the Atlantic. So as well as working for the Gambling Commission, I sit on the board of GREF, which is the Gambling Regulators European Forum, brings together regulators across Europe. And we've recently held our first ever joint board meeting with our American colleagues. And, you know, just a real sign that I think we recognise we're often regulating the same companies, dealing with the same risks and opportunities. So increasingly we're speaking to each other, we're sharing information and intelligence. And just this week we've seen that kind of step further forward still. So there's been an announcement that the National Council of Legislators in Gaming States, which is kind of a collection of leading politicians in the United States, are going to be working with us to develop model iGaming legislation for the United States. And it's a real opportunity for our experiences in the UK of regulating what is still the biggest licensed online market in the world to actually help shape the way that some of this regulation is going in the United States. I think that benefits us as regulators. Actually, it will benefit the industry as well, because where there are areas where you can take a similar approach in different countries, then clearly industry and consumers benefit from that.
Mm-hmm. On the note of collaboration with other regulators, does the Gambling Commission take note of kind of fines and punishments that are in other jurisdictions. And I mentioned Sweden and the Netherlands earlier. There are often kind of fines there. Canada, certainly some big ones in Australia. That's quite further afield. But is that something that the GC keeps an eye on and maybe incorporates in its own policies?
So absolutely. We're always looking at what our regulatory colleagues are doing, and I know they do the same. And whilst a regulatory finding in one country won't automatically have consequences here, clearly, if one of our operators is found to have, some real systemic failings in another jurisdiction, we are naturally going to want to be reassured that those same failings aren't happening here and can't happen here. So, those findings are absolutely relevant to us. What we've also said to the industry is that if you are found to be operating illegally in other jurisdictions by an appropriate authority and appeal mechanisms have been exhausted, we may well then take that into account in assessing whether you are suitable to hold a licence here. If you're prepared to be the black market in another jurisdiction, that may well have consequences elsewhere.
Yeah, obviously. I mean, it's in a global ecosystem, nothing is separate, is it? It all links together. How would you comment at the moment on the kind of overall level of compliance, and maybe we talked about how the Commission is engaging, on the reverse angle, how the industry is engaging with you guys?
Yeah, so anyone that's been looking at our work over the last few years will have seen often quite regular, quite large fines coming out from us. But I do think they've had an impact. Certainly our experiences over the last year or so have been much more positive. We've had some really good engagement with operators to address issues at a much earlier stage, what we kind of refer to as compliance at the earliest opportunity. And whilst I can't be certain that we won't see more big penalties coming down the lines, I think certainly we are seeing evidence of real improvements, particularly in some of those big operators that have been through our casework processes before. What I think we have to be really alive to, though, is whether there is a risk of some of those regulatory issues being displaced to some smaller operators. We're looking, for example, at other operators that are very rapidly growing in terms of their customer base, in terms of their GGY, because that might point to them not being as robust as we would want in terms of how they deal with customers.
Sure. Is there anything you feel the Commission itself could do a little better in 2024, maybe given industry feedback? And I know last time we spoke you mentioned maybe clarity when it comes to certain data and maybe some complex concepts.
Yeah, so I think probably one of the key things for us over the next year is around the way that we communicate. We've got to make sure that we communicate in a timely way, that particularly on things like white paper consultations, we give stakeholders, whether that's industry or anyone else, as much notice of that as possible. I think we need to make sure that we're clear about what the objective is that we're trying to achieve. So not just the policy, not just the rule, but what is the outcome that we want to try and achieve? And then I think the other area that is linked to all of that, where I'm confident we will absolutely get better, is around the way that we evaluate what we do. Now, we have for some time said to industry, in terms of their interventions, you need to evaluate them to understand if they're having the impact that they should be having. If I'm really honest, I don't think the Commission's been as strong on this as we could have been in recent years. But we gave a very clear commitment at the start of the white paper that we would hardwire evaluation into what we're doing. And we've recently actually jointly procured with DCMS some evaluation services. So the fact that us as the regulator, DCMS as the government, are jointly going to be evaluating the impact of white paper proposals, I think is a really important and really powerful step forward.
So you've mentioned the white paper a couple of times. I think it's quite an achievement that I haven't mentioned it yet, because seeing as it's so important in the UK market. But I think to close off a couple of final topics definitely linked to the white paper, could you give us some the latest updates on where we are with potential financial checks for players?
Yeah, so obviously the financial risk checks was the proposal that probably had the greatest amount of attention from people, and it's one of the areas where actually we do have to be really clear in our communication so that people understand what we're trying to do. Over the coming weeks, I think we'll be announcing sort of formally what the next steps are, but our expectation is that we're going to take a different approach to what we've done in the past around regulatory change. So typically, when we've consulted on changes, we've announced the outcome of that consultation, and if we go ahead with the change, then a few months later those changes come into our rule book. With financial risk checks, I think we recognise that this is a really new area, it's a fairly controversial area, it's a really complex area. And And I don't think it's something that easily lends itself to us immediately implementing new rules. So we are currently exploring how we might do a pilot of financial risk checks. And that's a way of perhaps checking the way the mechanisms are working, making sure we're getting the right information, that the relationship and the information sharing between credit reference agencies and the gambling industry is working well. And I think the fact that we're looking at pilots, I hope, is evidence of our commitment to try and do this properly, to listen to the feedback that we've had through consultations, to understand perhaps the unintended consequences of some of this, and to really get under the skin of what impact it will have on consumers. And I think a pilot could be a really important step forward in doing that.
Yeah. Hypothetically, if a pilot sort of was considered a complete failure, would the Commission not hesitate to start from scratch? Or is it, because with regulation there can be a case of if a lot of work has been put into implementing certain rules, there's a reluctance to maybe do it all over again?
Yeah, so we've been very clear with all of the policies in the white paper. Our focus is on delivering the policy objective in the white paper. If in piloting things we find that actually the approach we plan to take doesn't deliver, then we won't have any hesitation in thinking again, adapting it, adjusting things. And clearly the fact that we're working so closely with DCMS on this, the fact that we're evaluating things together, I think will really help us properly understand whether the approach we're taking is delivering what was intended in the white paper.
Sure. Overall, in terms of the white paper, can I ask what the latest or next steps are? Because obviously there's not been any major announcements, I guess, since it was out in April, but there's always something ongoing in the process.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a massive piece of work, and to give people a sense of the scale of what the Gambling Commission are trying to do, we've probably got around 50 different people working on implementation of the white paper. It's a huge piece of work. I think in terms of immediate next steps, as I say, we'll be making some announcements shortly off the back of the first round of consultations, which closed sort of towards the end of the summer. In a week or so's time, the second round of consultations will be closing, and obviously we'll be assessing all of those responses. And then, as we go into the year, we'll be moving towards probably the next round of consultations. So I don't think we're done yet, but I think my reflection so far is that we've been really pleased with the level of engagement we've had from people in the consultations, both in terms of formal responses and through direct engagement with stakeholders. It's clear that there is a huge number of people, not just in the Commission, that are all seeking to try and make this work, and that does make our lives easier. For sure.
A final question from me: if any viewers are watching, wondering what a potential UK election this year what impact it might have on the white paper, what would you say to those people and their questions, I guess?
So I think there's two elements to this. One is there will always be a practical consequence. So for us as a public body, we're bound by government rules as to what you can and can't say during that period just leading up to the election, sometimes called the purdah period. So it will mean that in that period of time, we may be limited as to what public announcements we can make, whether we can publish consultation responses. So it might, delay some of that by, a few weeks. But actually, we're building that into our planning, so I don't think it will have a significant impact there. The other area that I often get asked about is if there was a change of government, and we don't know whether there will be, could that mean that either we go back to the drawing board on the white paper or things get stopped? And our sense is that actually whoever's in power is probably not going to change the policy positions. That if you look, when the white paper landed, it was pretty well received across Parliament. Gambling reform does seem to be one of those few areas where politicians have been able to agree fairly well. So I don't think it will significantly change the direction of the white paper, but it might just slow things down for a couple of weeks.
Well, Tim, thanks very much for your time. Thanks for joining us again, and good luck with the many undertakings the Commission is going to have this year.
That's great. Good to be with you, Tim.
Thank you. To our viewers, thanks for watching.